Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Shelley, President of the Rotary Club of Portland. Welcome to our live weekly membership meeting. We have a little bit of a challenge today in that our speaker was called away on an emergency. But Rotarians are nothing if they're not nimble. And so we're going to be doing 2 breakout sessions. And we thank you all for joining us and hope that you will be flexible as we adjust to changing situations. I also hope you had a restful 4th of July holiday. This past 4th was different from all others. Not only was there a lack of fireworks and big social gatherings, but also this holiday prompted dialogue on what freedom, independence, and justice really means in our country today, and for whom. As our banner behind me says, Rotary opens opportunities to explore those big questions through the lens of our 4-way test. And now, let's welcome past President and past District Governor Rotarian Danielle Banks for our reflection. Danielle?
Thank you and good afternoon, President Ruth and all of our Rotarians and guests. My thoughts for the day come from my Seattle sis, and it's entitled Thoughts During a Pandemic. May we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health and making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close remember those who have no options. May we who have to cancel our trips remember those who have no safe place to go. And may we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. May we who settle in for quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country over the pandemic and racial unrest, let us choose love and service to others. During this time when we can't physically wrap our arms around each other, and I know we want to do that, let us find ways to open doors to opportunities to serve by listening for those opportunities to offer an extra kind word to family members, our neighbors, and our friends around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. What wonderful words to start our meeting. And of course, if any of you would like to give the reflection at an upcoming meeting, please don't hesitate to reach out to Javon or Corinne or me and let us know. I also wanted to welcome any virtual guests that we might have at the meeting. At this time, if you could introduce yourself by typing your name into the chat box. Thank you for tuning in to our weekly membership meeting. And it's July. I'd like to extend a happy birthday to everyone with July birthdays. And we'll show a screen of all those July birthday celebrants. We're going to alternate each week honoring birthdays and Rotary anniversaries for the month. So please scan the names of these birthday people and reach out to one of them with a call or an email, since in-person celebrations continue to be limited. It's a small way for us to stay connected. A lot of July birthdays there. Congratulations to all. And some of them are on the screen today. Now we're going to enter into a virtual table talk. In a few minutes, all of us will disappear from here and then reappear in a virtual room with just a few other Rotarians. The Rotarians in your group will be at random. If you don't all know each other, please introduce yourselves just like you would when you'd sit down at a table at the Sentinel. A minute or so before you come back to this main meeting, you'll get a visual heads up. And may I suggest one Zoom tip? If you right click on your name, you can change the name that is in your picture so that you're essentially wearing your name badge. And I also suggest a topic. You want to think about what did you do this past holiday weekend and what did you especially enjoy or miss with the coronavirus limitations? So that topic was, what did you do this past holiday weekend and what did you especially enjoy or miss with the coronavirus limitations? Corinne, I'll let you break us up into different tabletops and have fun. Everyone. And again, if you have any feedback, please provide it in the chat or reach out to us after the meeting today. Pastor Hennessee, I'm so glad that you can join us, and our hearts go out to you with the crisis in your congregation, but we feel especially honored to have you with us. And before we get to our speaker, I'm pleased to introduce two of our youth exchange students. First, let's please welcome Rebound Youth Exchange student Elizabeth Lux to tell us about her time in Brazil. Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I just got back from Brazil in March, late March, like 3 months early, but I still had a lot of fun, and I learned a lot on my exchange. You can see my screen. So I was in Minas Gerais, which is a state in the interior of Brazil. I don't know if I'm so.
Looks like we might have lost Elizabeth.
Why don't we go on to Rebound Youth Exchange student Max Pren. Max, are you on and are you able to present? And then we'll go back to Elizabeth if she can re-log on.
Sounds good. I'll share my screen because I have a little presentation. Okay. Okay. Just sorry for the sound outside if you can hear it, by the way, because there's like gardening people here. Hopefully you can hear me all right. This is my presentation. My name is Max Pren. I'm 17 years old. I went on exchange to Thailand this last year for about 8 months, from August to late March. This is the host family that I stayed with. This is my host mom, my host dad. And we stayed in a small little like industrial city in the southeast end of Thailand. You can see on the map here. And it's called Laem Chabang. While I was there, they called me Mesa, which in Thai means April. And they called me that because they wanted my Thai name to kind of sound like my real name, Max. And they give all the exchange students Thai names. This is more of where I lived. It was kind of like an industrial area. There was an oil rig nearby, and there was like some cool hills where a bunch of monkeys lived. And this was a market that I would go to with my host family a lot. And the neighborhood that I lived in, that was a gated community because most of the neighborhoods there were gated. This was the first school that I went to. I went to 2 different schools while I was there. And in all schools in Thailand, you wear a uniform, and it's a very like casual classroom kind of feeling. This was some of my favorite food while I was in Thailand. There was shabu and a noodle dish called yentafo, which is like has this red dye that makes it really colorful. And I almost always had that at lunch at school because their school lunches are really good. And I forget what this is called, but it's really, really good. This is another picture of a market that I would go to with my host family and of the monkeys that lived on the mountain near my house. While I was there, my district took us, like all the exchange students, on 3 different trips. The first trip, we went to northeastern Thailand to a mountain called Phukadung, and we went on this huge hike. It was like 4 hours up the mountain, and we stayed on the top of the mountain for a couple days, and like we went on this sunrise hike, and it was really, really cool. The second trip we went on was to the northwest kind of side. We visited some of the bigger cities called Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai. We saw a bunch of temples, as you can see, and we got to hang out with elephants for a while, which was really cool. We bathed them and fed them. That was like amazing. And the third trip we went on was to the south. This was the one that most people looked forward to the most. And it was really relaxing. The weather was gorgeous. This is like what you would see if you search up Thailand on Google. It's probably like the beautiful like vacation south. And we saw some petroglyphs of like old cavemen drawings, which was really cool. And yeah, while I was there, I also traveled around with my hosts a lot. We went to Bangkok, which was some of my like favorite trips that we would go on because it just reminded me a lot of being home in Portland because I didn't live in a city. Saw a bunch of temples and learned a lot about Buddhist culture. And I met some really great people. This is one of my friends. And yeah, there's a lot to fit into 3 to 5 minutes. And I'm totally open to, if anyone wants to talk about it, I love talking about everything that I learned, all my experiences. It was really, really amazing. And I think Rotary is like really amazing for allowing kids my age to go and see the world and gain a bigger concept of the world and become like meet new people and learn these really important lessons about different cultures and just expand your mind. And I'm forever grateful for Rotary to have given me this opportunity. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Max. What exotic photos, and I'm so glad that you had a wonderful time. We really appreciate Youth Exchange as spreading peace throughout the world, and I know you're a wonderful representative of our country. Now we're about to go into our main speaker. We'll welcome Elizabeth back at a future meeting. And just to note that after our main speaker today is finished, if you'd like to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen is a participants button, and that if you click on that, you will see your name and you can click on the hand icon to raise your hand. We'll move without delay to our chair of the day, Rotarian Bill Diaz. Would you please do the introduction?
Ruth, thank you very much. I'm happy to do the introduction this afternoon. I'm very pleased that we are with Pastor Matt Hennessee, who is the senior pastor of Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church, and he's been the senior pastor there for 15 years. And in that time, he's built some great bridges to the community. Matt has a very unique background. He has a business background. He was an executive with Nike and also with Quick Track. He also has a political public service background, having been a city manager. And he's done a lot of things in his life that really contribute to his search for justice, to make this a more just and equitable world, to make this a place that our children grow up in with equal opportunity. And I've been pleased to work with Matt for the last 5 years on the Interfaith Peace and Action Collaborative that meets at North Precinct, where we're trying to improve relationships with Portland police and the community it serves, and to try to get police to see themselves more as peacemakers and not as warriors. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Pastor Matt Hennessee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Bill, and for each of you as members of Portland Rotary. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share today, especially to talk about a subject that I thoroughly enjoy. Let me, before I begin my remarks, I was very pleased to see the investment that you have made in these two young ladies, who both of them have spent time in places that I have spent time with in my career as well, both in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and in all over Thailand. So it's really good to see that, and the continuation of the kind of work that Rotary does in sewing into the lives of young people to help strengthen them as they go through life. So keep up the great work. It reminds me of the work that we do every January in our own scholarship program, where we adopt about 6 schools, alternative schools and mainline schools in the Portland area, to really support the after high school dreams of young people. If I were to, because I'm a preacher, I'm going to be careful not to expect any amen since everybody's on mute. But I want to give you my remarks in this regard. Number one, I'd like to talk about the dream, the promise, and the hope for the future. The dream, the promise, and the hope for the future. And my plan, Madam President, is to keep my remarks to about 15 minutes so that there are a good 10 minutes afterwards for people to ask questions. And I know that there are some people on this in our room today, from Daniil and Phil and Bill and Al, and there may be others who have seen some of the work that we do together in the field, and I'm grateful for that. When I think about the dream, and one of the things I spoke about not too long ago after the unfortunate and really barbaric murder of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis, is I said, this is our country's unfinished business. Unfinished business meaning that our racial divide has been very clear and very real. And quite frankly, all of us are responsible for trying to do everything that we can to heal, to understand, to heal, and to move forward, to make very good, strong, both recommendations and actually make them happen, so that the next generation of Oregonians, and quite frankly, people who are part of the United States of America, don't have to deal with the same thing. If you think about it, in the framers of our independence, no matter how we look at it, they really articulated a vision for a free country that would be open to everyone. And while we recognize that there were some disparities in that, that was the hope. When I think about the dream of Dr. King's dream was never a dream trying to make Black people more important than white people, or to say that Black supremacy is greater than white supremacy. In fact, his statements were that no person is free until all people are free. His statements were that Black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy, and that literally it's not hate that drives out hate, but it's love that does. And if you see the preamble of his I Have a Dream speech, he made it clear then, as we are dealing with now, he said that we literally come to Washington, D.C. to cash a check. He said this check has come back to the Black community marked insufficient funds. He said, but we have come to Washington to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice, because he was saying that this check was what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were providing for everyone who was a member of the United States of America. And what he was saying was that, quite frankly, we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And he went on to say, that's why we're here, to cash this check. And I believe that 57 years later, That's exactly what we're doing now. And we are trying to make good on this dream, on the promise of the hope that everyone would indeed be seen as brothers and sisters. Yes, is it possible? I believe it is. And that's why I have so much hope for where we are now and where we go in the future. So the dream was that of Dr. King, but it certainly came from the founding fathers and mothers. The promise was the promise of democracy for everyone and the hope for the future. It's kind of where we are right now. If you take a step back in Oregon's history, on June 26, 1844, the framers of the territory wanted this to be a white utopia. I'm not making that up, that's in our history. In fact, they not only said we want to make it a white utopia, that every free Black person who was here needed to be beaten on a regular basis to try to encourage them to leave. And that was in 1844. 15 years later, during our statehood, it was reinforced that that's what was expected, that we would have a white utopia. This was just for white people. And through all of those years of slavery, of Reconstruction, of Jim Crow, of the Civil Rights Movement, and even today, there are people who live in Oregon who bought their homes in the 1970s, and in the title language, there is still a statement about do not sell this property to people who are Black, people who are indigenous, if you will, people who are Jewish. All of those kind of covenants still exist. A good friend of mine who's African American has shown me theirs. They live in the Irvington area, and I saw the title to their property, and I was totally aghast. They bought it in the early 1990s, and that language is still there. So my friends, what we know is that much of what we have been dealing with has been passed down from one generation to another generation to another generation. I would love to tell you that in my own life, as a person who was born into a foster care right from the beginning, because my arms and legs were turned around the wrong way, and I was born to a teenage mother who had been born to a teenage mother, and the people at the state of Ohio, which is where I was born, told them he'll never walk. If he walks at all, he'll walk with a limp, but he needs to have several surgeries for him to be able to live a full and complete life. But even with that, he will still probably not walk at all. Thankfully, my first foster mother didn't want to hear that, and so she kept doing things herself, even though she was not a medical doctor, but she was a prayer. She prayed a lot, and she believed that somehow God was going to allow me to walk. And interestingly enough, at the age of 3 years old, I took my first steps. And she was unfortunately killed during, I think, when I was 7 years old. And so often when I think about, she was killed by a drunk driver, blew a stop sign. And I was taken out of foster care again. Taken out of their home, their foster home, into another orphan home, and then ended up in another foster home after that, and remained in foster care until I was a sophomore in college at Oberlin. I say all those things to say that all of my life, I have heard how I'm supposed to act. I've been told how I need to treat people. I'm told how white people always have the upper hand, how you have to work harder, you have to do more, you have to be smarter, all of that. And was told, by the way, don't forget when you get your license, if you get stopped, make sure that you keep your hands visible and that you don't do anything that will agitate the police, because if you do, even a traffic stop could end up with your life being snuffed out. That was a reality from the time I was 16. And of course, as you can tell, 16 was only a couple of years ago. To exacerbate that, as a pastor for the last 15 years, but literally being in ministry for the last 30 years. I've served at Nike in global leadership. I was president and CEO of a company down in Lake Oswego. But it doesn't matter. Even when I get under the wheel right now, specifically at night, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, I can get called out to somebody's house in crisis, to a hospital, to the jail, anywhere. When that happens, I take great precautions. Number one, I full stop at every stop sign. And even if it's a 35-mile speed limit, I'll put my cruise control on because I recognize the risk that I run. For the last 4.5 years, we've been working very hard with the Portland Police Bureau because of the gap of credibility between the police bureau and the community. And the reason why we have embarked on that journey is to say that we have to be able to make sure that Portland is not Ferguson, is not Baltimore, is not Dallas, is not, I can go up and down the list of places where it has been an absolute, not just a frictional relationship, but it's a relationship that has ended up with all sides really working against one another. Here we can say that the last 4.5 years we have helped the Bureau be able to see itself. They have helped, number two, us to see ourselves, because sometimes we can be nothing but finger pointers. Everything is your fault. And the truth of the matter is everything is not all the police fault. Number three, what we've done is said that we are going to engage in conversation to learn one another, understand each other. Where we don't understand one another, we're going to work to try to figure out how we can get to know each other's perspective by seeing life and work in their lens. One of the things I forgot to mention to you is that I led police and fire in Saginaw, Michigan, right after I got out of college. And it was as a civilian. I worked in the police bureau to help pay my way through college. I was appointed to the leadership of the police and fire in Saginaw, 270 people in police, 135 to 40 in fire. And I did that for 4 years before I went on to be city manager in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where again, I had a police force and a fire as well. So I've been out on a lot of calls. I've been in the car, I've worked around, I've helped reform police bureaus. There's no time for me to talk about the various things I ran into both in police and fire, but just know these are realities. So here we're saying we're not going to point fingers at one another. We're going to figure out how to get along with each other and figure out how we can help one another be better at what we do. Those are the tenets. What I can tell you in terms of where we are right now, I would say that we're on the cusp of doing something that the very right Reverend Al Jubitz was trying to get done several years ago. And that is, he basically said to us, and I'm going to say it a little bit more dramatically than he did. How do you Black people want to be policed? Was really where he was coming from, right? And quite frankly, no matter how it may have taken people aback, it was the right question, because it really does say, invite yourself into the conversation, that as long as we are determined to be at odds with one another, we'll never make any progress. Now, the problem for all of us is Al got, he went down to the Shakespearean festivals in Ashland and had himself a great time. And so he thinks that every city is like Ashland. Portland is nowhere like Ashland. It would be sweet if it were, but it's far less homogeneous in culture, I would say, than as Ashland is. We are not. But the idea to me at this point is how we really desire to have a community that not only speaks about community policing, but also is able to look at it from a standpoint of how do we, over the next 10 to 15 years, develop a culture in our city and in our bureau that says we want to be peace officers, number one, and to the extent that we can have more civilians working in the police bureau and have more of our officers really help understand how reaching for your gun or your taser is not the first thing that you do, that you take every opportunity to de-escalate every interaction that you have. For everybody on the call today, it is true that we have, if you talk to most people, they would think that Portland is just literally, about to combust. I can tell you that before the demonstrations downtown, we have an average of about 350 to 365,000 calls for service every year. Less than 2% of them end up in use of force. I'll say that one more time, 350 to 365,000 calls for service, less than 2% in use of force. Use of force is not just drawing your gun, but when you draw your gun, that is considered a use of force, even if you don't discharge it. If you speak in a commanding way to someone that you're working with, that is a use of force. So I say all that to say that sometimes we allow the national narrative to really push what's happening locally. And the reality is there are things that are happening nationally that have nothing to do and clearly are not associated with what's going on here. Does that mean we don't have things to work on? Absolutely not. We've got plenty to work on. So let me give you a few other snippets and then I'm looking forward to your questions. Number one, I spoke very passionately to the mayor and council for the decisions that they made recently about school resource officers. What I know is that school resource officers in Portland, there is a national narrative that says it's really a bad deal. In the Portland area, I said to them, I've walked the streets with the young people. I've walked right by their sides in marches downtown, in rallies in the park. They may say disparaging things about police, but I promise you, when the school resource officer shows up, they're high-fiving. That is my buddy. They see them as people they can identify with. And what I'm concerned about in terms of the after effect is that when the crime bill was put together back in 1993, and everybody was saying we're going to get, more officers on the street, 3 strikes you're out, all that stuff, nobody thought down the road to mass incarceration. What am I concerned about? I'm extremely concerned about the fact that school resource officers managed to resolve 98% of the issues that occur in the schools with the young people right there. And 2% of them or so end up in the juvenile justice system. And let me just say to everybody, as much as possible, you don't want to be in the system, period. What can happen without a better way of looking at this is that you can find that we're going to open up a pipeline that's a lot bigger to the juvenile justice system as a result of the fact that principals and teachers have got to do a job. And if there's a disruption in the classroom, they're more than likely to call the police and say, deal with this situation, a police officer who may not be trained in that area whatsoever. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the CERT team, which is our SWAT team. The hostage negotiations that they do are shocking. But here's what I can tell you. The 98% of the time, and I'm not making these numbers up, they save lives. And I can tell you, because I have also seen people who are going to jump off the bridge, any one of our bridges, they are the ones talking them off that bridge. Young man connected to our church, his grandfather and grandmother are members of our church. He was here, had mental health issues, all that stuff. In his early 40s, was brandishing knives at the corner of 33rd and Liberty, determined he was going to do something to make the police kill him. That's what he wanted them to do. They were there on that corner for 6 hours. His mother, a PhD professor in California who did not like police at all, was standing out there on that corner, and I stood with her. And when it was all over, she said, Pastor, there is no way that in Los Angeles, where I come from, that my son would still be alive. What happened afterwards, they kept calling and making sure when he went back to California that he was doing okay. That is your Portland Police Bureau. Do we have issues? Gosh, yes. The West Lynn situation was horrible. And I want you to know that there are situations like that in every one of our police bureaus. But this one, the majority of what happens there is good stuff. I call them out when they do good stuff. I call them out when I feel that they really aren't doing good stuff as well. Well, I got the signal that my time is about done. And, you know, we preachers, you know, look at signals like that and we pay attention and we say, okay, everybody's going to sleep. So let me go ahead right now and just end abruptly. And then I'll answer any questions that you may have, if I still have question time left available.
Pastor Hennessee, thank you for those wonderful words. We all watch the national news, but you brought a personal perspective to racial justice that we wouldn't have gotten from any other source. Are there any questions for the pastor from those present on this call? Either use the participant button or drop a question into the chat. I think we have time for one or two.
Chris and Phil both have their hands raised. Chris, go ahead.
Chris?
So am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is a little bit of a jump. If you were creating the legislative program at a national level, what are your top 3 priorities and how would you structure those bills?
I would structure them with an intense amount of training, which is disruptive. I call it disruptive training, meaning that it takes the officer to not just go to a class and say, I checked that box, I went. It's disruptive training that says, my whole worldview is going to change. If you talk to somebody like Bob Day, he can tell you what that looks like. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I would want to legislate body cameras for every police officer, no matter how big or small the department, because what has happened, and I think it's really good, is that we would never, ever have understood the level of hate and disgust that was shed in Minneapolis if we had not seen it. Those 8 minutes, 46 seconds with whatever that officer's name is, I've never tried to know his name, on Mr. Floyd's neck, were 8 minutes and 46 seconds of ugly hate that took us back to what 400 years has given us. And he didn't really care. The look on his face didn't change. He even put his hands in his pocket. But without people being around filming, that would never have happened. The third thing that I would say is the use of civilians, retired police officers that were really good. And I talk a lot about the mamas, big mamas and grandmas and granddaddies that are in our communities who really have wisdom and help understand the history, by the way, of any locale that someone's policing, but also the opportunity for them to be able, not be volunteers, pay them to literally help and walk alongside and ride alongside our police officers as well. Those are my 3.
Excellent. Phil, I see you have a question.
Myself, there we go. Pastor Matt, I read an interesting article this weekend in the New York Times Magazine by Isabel Wilkerson, and she referred to what's going on in this country in terms of what's developed is we have developed a caste system which attempts to keep people in their place. I would appreciate it if you'd comment on that.
Yeah, I think, Phil, thank you. I think, first of all, I would agree with that comment. I have said to people before, when people are really ready to talk about this topic, and I've had the pleasure of teaching and speaking about this all over the country and sometimes outside the country. We have to remember that in this country, that even though I have a bachelor's, a master's, and finishing a doctorate and have an honorary doctorate as well, if I'm standing next to a guy in Appalachia who, by the way, has no education whatsoever, he still thinks he's way better than I am. Now, I see him as my brother, but he sees me as beneath him. If you think about us in this country, about 4 years ago, when Black Lives Matter started, it offended a lot of white people. And many people immediately said, all lives matter, right? And by the way, I have to say that because of the Martin Luther King training that I had growing up, I felt somewhat the same way. What I realized is that that one of the real fundamental reasons that Black Lives Matter is because if we can resolve the issue of unarmed Black men on the street and the fear that evidently just courses through the veins of those police officers, and you saw it again in Atlanta and you've seen it in other places, if we can somehow get through that, then all lives can matter, because Black lives matter. And when we say, and by the way, I want you to know that I had an amazing experience this weekend. We went to the Dalles to get some cherries, and we saw Black Lives Matter signs in people's houses. I'm like, Lord have mercy, we're getting there, aren't we? Because I would never have expected that. So I do think that there is a caste system. My prayer is that we will get beyond that, but it's going to take a lot of work. Right now, I've got several faith leaders of all different leadership in religion in Oregon. Now, I want you to know that's not an easy feat, but they have unanimously agreed to sign a pledge and a recognition of our history, but a pledge for how we will go forth all over this state, training and developing and helping people tell stories, and for people to be able to say, you know what, I have been complicit in this, and now I need to do my part as well. And we're working on the politicos to do the same thing, because I think it's important. And I think in every one of our homes, we need to remember that kind of caste system needs to be thrown out the window, and we need to be able to look at each other as brothers and sisters. And I believe the spirit of Martin Luther King, Coretta King, Rosa Parks, and so many unnamed men and women of all cultures have got to be in the spirit saying, you know what, y'all keep going, because we're going to get there one day.
Pastor, I know that we're at time, and I understand if any of you need to log off, but we do have 2 more questions, and with your indulgence as a speaker, if we could take 5 more minutes. Wesley, you had a question, and then Augustine, and we will close after those 2 questions. Wes? Corinne, can you unmute Wes, please?
I did. Wes, you need to unmute yourself. There should be a box
okay.
that says.
No, I was able to. Thank you, Pastor Matt, for your presentation. I thought it was really insightful and balanced. You sort of touched on what I'd like to ask you about, and that is, how do you see the match between what we ask the police department to do and what resources we give them, and also what resources are available in the community that might be used? You already touched on that a little bit.
Well, first of all, I think it's a great question. I can tell you that as a city manager, I found that we were very, very short on resources. And I spent time with our city council and in many forums and listening sessions around our city. And we ended up developing what was called Operation Pressure Point. And it was specifically to add to the police bureau in areas that were the hardest for us to get our arms around. And in Portland, and quite frankly, it's an Oregon problem. The moment, and I don't know when this happened, but it happened during my lifetime here, the mental health system ended up losing all kind of funding, and people were out on the street. Most police officers you talk to will tell you that a lot of their work today is really dealing with people who are mentally ill and on the street and having crisis. And I honestly believe that the state needs to reinvest in the mental health system and to really provide opportunity for people, because quite frankly, I can't tell you specifically what percentage of the calls are, but I can tell you a huge percentage of calls are that. The next thing I would say is that we all want our neighborhood police officer back. We want that you know, I know who this person is, and when I have a, you know, an issue that I want to be able to have that person show up, or for our kids and grandkids to say, when I grow up, I want to be a police officer. Well, for that police officer to get out of his or her car to walk the neighborhood, we've got to do, I think, a better job of not defunding the police, but funding what community policing really is. And honestly, my property taxes, trust me, I'd more than happily pay for that, because I believe that it makes our communities safer, and I think it provides a good pattern for the future.
Excellent. And Augustine, our last question.
Thanks. I think this is quick, Reverend Hennessy, but I had the opportunity to do a police ride-along years ago, and to me, it was just a, I wouldn't say it was like the most important like experience of my life, but it was deeply, it left a huge impression on me. It was just very, it's not what I expected being a police, what you see is not what I expected, you know, policing to be about. And I came away from that experience thinking that it ought to be part of like a high school education, that just as a student, you go on a police ride along, and it's just part of either your social studies class. I don't know, there's some class that it would be a part of, but my impression was that that would just completely change one's perspective, both positively and negatively, what policing is. And I was just curious on, you know, your perspective on it. Just seems like that would make just a big difference if citizens actually were out with police officers and seeing kind of day to day what it's like.
First of all, I'm so glad that you treated yourself to that investment, because like in almost any other profession, you really don't get to know what it's like until you're sitting in the shoes of the one who does it. And it does open your eyes to some things that are really, really amazing. I'm grateful, Augustine, that you did it. I do believe it's a good recommendation to have young people, and quite frankly, others. In our Interfaith Peace and Action Collaborative, we've really suggested that everybody take an opportunity to do that. And I try to do it at least once a year. So I'm up. It's time for me to do it again, and I could do it more often. But I think that you get to understand something. And here's the other thing I'm going to tell you. I'm going to bet that the officer that you rode with learned a lot from you. It is a great two-way street. And I would just say, please keep doing that. And I will take to the superintendent of schools and to the police chief the idea of young people being involved in a program like this. There used to be an Explorers program in the police bureau where kids in 9th or 10th grade could actually go and be interns and do work in the police bureau. And then ultimately, by the time they were seniors in high school, they could go out and ride with their parents' permission. That spawned the opportunity for a number of young people to actually go into police work. And it's been really amazing. So again, thank you for that question, for that comment. And then for the rest of you, Madam President, Bill and Daniil and Phil and all of them, they have my email address is all lowercase, pastor.Matt, H, M as in Mary, A-T-T as in Tom, H as in Henry, at comcast.net. And I'd be happy to talk with you more. I saw somebody in there saying that they would like to do that. I think the Easter salesperson, and I used to know your predecessor, Bill, who I think retired. But thank you so much, Madam President. Thank you for you as a group having me. It was really wonderful to be a part of your time today.
Thank you, Pastor. I wish you could hear a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next week, our keynote speaker is to be determined, but please keep an eye out on our website and newsletter to learn about who that will be. And once again, we'll be meeting live via Zoom. Finally, thank you, Daniil, for a thought-provoking reflection. Bill, for your warm introduction of Pastor Hennessy. Thanks, Max, for your rewound report today, and we look forward to having Elizabeth back. Rotary's Youth Exchange Program is just one way that Rotary opens opportunities for peace building in our world. And finally, thank you again, Pastor Hennessy, for your inspiring message of advancing racial justice in our society. As we reflect on Independence Day, I will carry Dr. King's message with me that no person is truly free until all people are free. As we enter into a new Rotary week, please join me in opening the doors of opportunity for healing, for recovery, and peace building. As Rotarians, we are here to make our world healthier, more sustainable, and with justice for all. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.